So as you think about the 4 phases of retirement, again, these are not autonomous, meaning that these don't happen exclusively at a point in time, but most of us will experience these phases one way or another. But the first being the honeymoon phase. And imagine this being the sheet cake party, the gold watch, you've done it, you're retired, everyone's celebrating your life and your career, and you go forth into the unknown. The second phase is that big decision phase, that once you're in retirement, now you have to consider that if a spouse passes away, if the kids move out, when the kids hopefully eventually move out, you've got some decisions to make, right? Do I upsize? Do I downsize? Do I move closer to my daughter because she and herself is having kids and I want to be a part of that process? The navigation phase in terms of, again, things will happen, right? Life is not a straight path. There's a lot of curves, bumps, and lows that go with that. So how do you adjust and adapt to those? Then lastly, the solo journey. So as we kick off the honeymoon phase, again, the role of work will change. I think in many cases, Shane, I'm sure you see this with your clients and prospects, that retirement is oftentimes a door that opens. It's not necessarily a room inside that door, right? Many things begin to come at your plate when that door of retirement begins to open. And so as you think about income and then dynamics of family, again, how you work and what you do will oftentimes determine that. As you think about remote work, this was a hot topic coming out of the pandemic. A lot of companies wanted people back into the office, but as you think about some folks, and my mom is a great example of this, she retired in 2019. My father was diagnosed with lung cancer in February 2020. We all know how the world changed in March 2020. She enjoyed the fact that she was able to be there for my dad, understanding that caregiving was an opportunity, especially during that time, not having much help. But she quickly realized, right, once things began to open up, that she missed that social piece of work. It wasn't just the work that gave her satisfaction, just being in tune to what was happening, having the mentorship opportunities. So she went back to work in a remote fashion. So when you think about that, work is meaningful to a lot of people beyond the paycheck. The reason why people go back to work, again, finances can play a role in that. Sometimes it can be health insurance benefits. Sometimes it could be the socialization piece. But the reality is it's a multitude of options here. And so as you think about what your retirement looks like, it doesn't have to be full stop. It could be a slow roll, if you will, into what's called gray retirement, right? Pun intended there. You could reduce your hours. You could, again, tap into the virtual piece. You could say, hey, I'm going to work 3 days, volunteer 2 days. So all of your days are still filled with purpose, but just in a different traditional kind of way. As you think about the money piece, right? I want to talk about the club sandwich generation. So Shane, you talked about the baby boomers. In many cases, yes, the baby boomers are retiring, but the baby boomers also have to consider, am I ready to retire today? My adult mom is still living, still needing, care. So I have to kind of figure out as I retire, how will I make sure that she's good to go financially? But then also I have to consider my adult children, right? So maybe this is not the baby boomers, but certainly Gen X. The adult child, according to MIT, is 33 years old. So when you consider that, right, your adult child is figuring things out, right, emotionally, financially, spiritually, you name it. Mom and dad are still, at a place where we need to support them, but I also have to consider my own retirement, right? I have to consider, do I want to keep working? If I'm going to work, how will things get done? So this is a very difficult situation for a lot of people, and so it has to be addressed. As you think about how you will pay for retirement, again, as you turn the spigot off of income, in many cases, there's an unknown on the other side. So in many cases, people say, hey, I just want to be able to work so I can have a physical paycheck. Like, I like the idea of getting paid. It may be at a reduced amount, but I like the idea of knowing where a certain portion of my income is coming from. As we talk about the big decision phase, I oftentimes will joke as I talk to people, I fly a lot. And so I end up sitting next to the most random people, but I'm always curious, like, hey, when you retire, where would you live? And the best answers that I often get is wherever, my spouse is, they point to their wife or their husband. Sometimes it's they want to be near the kids and grandkids. Sometimes it's, look, not here, right? And so if that's the reality, you have to answer those questions, right? Finding your purpose, certainly in terms of what's your why, both today, tomorrow, and next week. And then how do you maintain access? And so as we talk about these questions, again, where you move, comes up often. If you live in the city today and you move to the burbs, that, kind of the suburban flight, your surroundings change. Perhaps it's a little easier to get around, but, Target may not be right next door, right? If you want a bigger property, you lose some of the access that you get in the city, right? So there's always trade-offs that you have to consider. But one of the ways MIT says that we can come to a conclusion about this is say, okay, what are the decisions that have to be made? No one likes the nursing home phrase. In many cases, though, it happens. As we talked about kind of that club sandwich generation, it may not be a nursing home, but having the wherewithal to say that, look, I can't care for mom and dad. Financially, it could be done, but it's just too much for me. So I have to outsource that, right? So maybe this is a decision that's not made by you, but with the help of others. But having a plan in terms of what you want is really important. So as we think about all this, I want everyone to kind of think theoretically about the questions that you see here on the screen. So the folks at MIT would say these 3 questions can help you determine your quality of life in retirement. With the first being, who will change my light bulbs? Again, this question seems, very generic. I've heard it, say it's kind of trite, right? It seems kind of obvious. Who's going to do the things that have to be done in the house? But if you talk about the aging process, if you ask 10 people where they would choose to age as they age, they would say in their home, right? 8 out of 10 people would actually say in their home. So if that's the case, who will get things done in the home? Not just who will cut the grass and who will change the light bulbs, but who will manage the home in its entirety. You might say to yourself, hey, I'll outsource that. But again, as we age, paying the bills, right? That's a task that has to be done. So again, who will do it? The second question is, how will I get an ice cream cone? And here on the East Coast, it's a very warm day, so ice cream or water ice sounds very appropriate. But the question here digs into, what do you enjoy? So if it's family, if it's friends, if it's, again, pickleball, if it's going to restaurants, right? How will you maintain access to those things for as long as you can? We talk about, moving, right? Imagine that you love playing pickleball. The place that you play pickleball is 5 minutes away. They've outgrown that facility. Now they move 20 minutes away, right? So now you have to face traffic. Now you have to deal with, a different route to get there. Will it change the access point to which you get there, right? We oftentimes talk about, again, keeping our family and friends safe. If you don't love Uber today, here's what I would tell you about Uber. Uber protects your kids, right? If you're a husband, Uber protects your wife from getting point A to B. Uber protects your elderly mom from getting from point A to B, right? So the access is not just simply how will you do it, but how you leverage a universe to actually get it done. Who will you have lunch with? That's the third question. This really points to isolation. We have to avoid it. Essentially being alone for an extended amount of time is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. So when you think about the chronic impact of that, perhaps you're an introvert. Perhaps, again, you like being by yourself. Doesn't mean you have to be a social butterfly, but having access to people to check on you, to be in a social environment, to be able to give back your time, those are all really powerful elements to retirement. So when you think about these questions, again, they may seem very simple, but when you unpack the answer to these, as you talk to Shane and his team, you may get some really concrete financial and really social answers to these to help you sustain retirement. All right, Shane, thoughts here?
Yeah, from a perspective of these kind of questions, right? They're excellent questions, right? I mean, isolation, I think, is the biggest thing, right? That most individuals who are working at a company for a long time or went to an office, that's the number one thing they miss. Obviously, hopefully they have their spouse still, they have their kids and whatnot, but the water cooler talk, right? The small things, your work relationship, your best friend at work, the things that you were so accustomed to kind of dumping off on Monday, right? And just, venting. Sometimes they're not there, and folks struggle with that. So, this frame of mind is right up there with some of the things that, hopefully we can, help prepare for and help with.